Daniel, did you have any interaction with the Gupta brothers?
Yes, I did. One of them, Mr. Chairman.
Could you tell the chairperson the circumstances under which you had such interaction?
Tell me first who it was.
I had the occasion to meet Mr. Ajay Gupta. It took place late July 2017. I was called by Salim Essa, and the conversation was actually about Mr. Malefe's pension matter. It was before court at the time. I said to him, don't waste my time. You know, Brian's going to lose the matter.
I'm sorry, how did you meet? Did he call you? Did somebody call you? A meeting was set up? Where was it set up? What did he say he want to talk to you about? Give me all the information.
That's what I'm saying. Mr. Salim Essa called me. That's
Mr. Salim Essa called you?
Salim Essa called me.
Yeah, and said what?
And said, the introduction was about the Malefe matter. Brian Malefe's pension matter that was before court. I said to him, Brian's going to lose that matter. And he then said, let's meet for coffee.
I'm sorry, just go back again. He called you, tell me he called you and said what? Did he say Brian Malefe matter? What did he say exactly?
He was asking what was happening with Brian Malefe's matter.
Yes, that is now Mr. Salim Essa.
Mr. Salim Essa.
This was 2017.
Late July 2017.
Late July. Was this the second time you were talking to him after the meeting at Melrose Arch? Or had you spoken to him or had communication with him in the meantime?
In the interim, I had communication with Mr. Essa.
Yes.
There was one meeting, physical meeting, at his offices when it was at Trillion.
Yes, and when was that?
I cannot recall the precise date of that meeting, Mr. Chairman, but
2015, 2016, 2017?
That would have been either early 2017.
Early 2017?
Yes.
Okay.
We were talking, would you want me to describe that one?
Yeah,
as
just tell me about that second meeting before you go to the July one.
Okay. So that meeting, Mr. Machela Coco told me that we were going to a meeting with Ms. Lynn Brown to talk about IPPs.
So that second meeting which you had with Mr. Salim Essa was arranged by Mr. Coco?
Yes.
Okay. What did Mr. Coco say to you to make the arrangement?
He said, I must please come along. We are going to meet Minister Brown to discuss the IPPs.
To discuss the IPPs?
Yes.
This is
early 2017.
And you went along?
And I went along.
And where was this meeting held?
I assumed that we were going to Pretoria, but once again we ended up in Melrose Arch.
Oh, and he had not told you that you were going to go to Melrose Arch?
No, he did not.
But did he say where the meeting was going to be held?
No, he did not. Because it was a meeting with Minister Brown, I assumed we would be going to Pretoria.
Okay. So you went to Melrose Arch?
We ended up in Melrose Arch.
Yeah.
This time, the offices, what I later came to find out, it was actually the offices of Trillion.
Yes.
The Trillion group of companies.
Yes.
I was made to sit outside the boardroom while he and Salim Essa had a meeting.
Yes.
Because it was a glass office, I could see them. But I was sitting outside of the boardroom. During the time that I was sitting out there, Mr. Eric Wood from Trillion came past and introduced himself to me.
Yes.
And during that introduction, Mr. Essa and Mr. Coco then came out of the boardroom. And Mr. Essa joked with me then, you know, you must tell your boss to stop tweeting.
Yes. Talking about Mr. Coco?
Talking about Mr. Coco,
Yes.
because he was very active on Twitter.
Yes.
And I think he's earned the nickname of Tweeting Engineer. So he was very active there. That was the end of that meeting. Mr. Coco and I then left. I obviously was very irritated with Mr. Coco. And I said to him, why did you bring me to this meeting? You know, I had to sit outside. And he said, well, he had things to discuss with Mr. Essa. And I was just like, please don't put me in this position again. Don't waste my time. We then returned to ESCOM.
So you didn't go to see Minister Brown?
Not at all that day.
Did you ask him what happened to the meeting with Minister Brown that you said we were going to?
I did ask him in the drive back, and he says that would be arranged for another time.
Yes. So he asked you to come along, said that the two of you were going to meet with Minister Brown, but took you to Melrose Arch, kept you outside of the boardroom, had a meeting with Mr. Salim Essa inside the boardroom, came out of the boardroom of the meeting, and drove back with you to ESCOM.
Yes.
That's quite strange too, isn't it?
Yes, it was very strange, and I was actually quite furious that he had wasted my time and had once again taken me into that situation.
But for all intents and purposes, from your version, it looks like he did not need you to come along.
No, he did not.
So why would he take you along when he didn't need you, let you interrupt your work and then take you not to a meeting, take you to outside the boardroom and have a meeting with somebody else inside?
Mr. Chairman, my only impression of what was happening at the time, that it was really a power play.
What power play?
He was acting CEO at the time. And he quite enjoyed showing that he was, you know, in charge.
But how would taking you to this meeting, but you sitting outside the boardroom show that he was in charge?
Well, I think also just letting me know who was in charge of my time, and it was a bizarre moment.
Ms. Daniels, this doesn't make sense to me.
But that's what happened, Mr. Chair. It happened like that. I sat outside.
It just takes you, I mean, you must have had a lot of important work to do. It takes you, says, come along, we're going to see Minister Brown. Doesn't take you to Minister Brown, takes you to Melrose Arch, makes you wait outside the boardroom, has a meeting with somebody. When he's finished, he says, okay, let's go back to ESCOM.
But that's how it happened. So I'm not, and I did have very, very stern words with him.
Did you ask him, why did you bring me here?
Well, he just laughed. He just laughed.
But did you ask him?
I did ask him. That's why I said, in the trip back, I said, why did you bring me here? This was an absolute waste of my time.
And the first time around when he took you to Melrose Arch to meet with Mr. Essa, I think you asked something and you said he just shrugged his shoulders.
Yes, he did. And you must
Yeah.
just remember that the first time that he took me, I was in a much junior position than what I was in 2017.
Okay.
So,
Anyway, so that was the second meeting, and then was the next meeting you had with Mr. Essa, the one, it was the end of July 2017? Or was there another one before that?
there was another one before that,
When was it?
but it wasn't a meeting. It was in June of 2017.
Yes. What was that one about? Or, Mr. Selega, is that something that is deferred to next time Ms. Daniels comes back?
No, Chair, I think you can go into it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's out of sequence, though.
Is it out of sequence? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
You just-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to see your interactions with the Guptas or their associates.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, with this one, I would have to give you just a little bit of context, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
It was in June, and Mr. Machela Koko had been on suspension for the conflict of interest, where he had not declared that his daughter was involved in Impulse. or
That's,
his
that's June 2017.
2017.
Okay.
Okay, so what all the events that I'm telling you now are in 2017. And we had received the report from Cliffdecker, Hofmeyer, and Nkonki about the conflict of interest. On the face of it, they could not find, any evidence of wrongdoing on the part of Mr. Koko. But what they had not done was interrogate the evidence. It was merely taking of statements and things. So when I presented the findings to the board, I said to them that they cannot take the report on face value. It needed to be interrogated. There was a bit of to and fro. This meeting was telephonic, and it was a meeting to the Audit and Risk Committee. And it was, and I remember that I was at great pains to explain to them, because there was a tussle between some of the board members said, well, the report says he can come back. Other members we're not so sure. But there was sort of a big leaning towards he can come back now, because he was acting CEO at the time. And I said to them, you cannot do that. We have to interrogate this report. You would be failing in your duty if you accepted it as is. Eventually, it was quite a struggle. It was a debate. The minutes will show you that there was quite a debate. At the end of it, I got the instruction to instruct a senior counsel to interrogate the report. So that was the meeting that happened on the 14th of July. So my apologies, the 14th of June, 2017.
So how did that meeting come about?
That was an Audit and Risk Committee meeting.
Oh, you mean that's the meeting?
That's the board.
Where you were dealing with the report from the...
Cliffdecker of May.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, all right.
Okay, that was just the context for you as to what would happen next. So the next day, this was in the evening, I then got the instruction to brief council, which I did in the morning. It's in the afternoon, I'm going home. There's a filling station across the way from a megawatt park. I go to the filling station and I was filling in petrol, and this Maserati pulls up next to me.
Who?
This Maserati,
Oh,
a black,
yes, yeah.
black,
It pulls up next to you.
pulls up next to me,
Yeah.
says to me, pull over. It was Mr. Salim Essa. Okay. So in the side, there are parking spaces. I park
At the
next
garage.
at the
filling station.
garage. It's in a public place. It motions to me to get out, and I get out, and he says to me, why are you not supporting the return of Machela Coco?
The what?
Why are you not supporting the return of Machela Coco?
Okay.
I was taken aback because of the meeting that happened before. He could recite verbatim what I had said.
At the meeting that you had with the Risk and Audit Committee.
At the meeting with the Audit and Risk Committee,
Yes. Which was a telephonic meeting, you said.
which was a telephonic meeting,
So he could recite exactly what you had said at the meeting.
what I had said at the meeting. So I was literally quite shocked. And I did say it, it took me a while to compose myself, because the first thing I thought was, how the hell did he know what I had said? The commission investigators actually highlighted it to me. He may have been on the call. And I said, that may well be. I wouldn't know, because I only arranged for the directors to be on the call. However, I then said to him, he said, why are you? So I said to him, well, that man is not fit to be CEO. And he said to me, I promised, no, I must just get the sequence right, I'm sorry. It was quite a quick,
Yeah.
it was quite a quick and a very, very significant,
You can refresh your memory if there's
yeah, I'm
something
just
that you
trying
have
to, I'm not sure if I wrote it in my affidavit. Because he then said to me, because I said to him, there is no way that Machela Coco could become CEO, and he should never come back to Eskom. The board would be derelict in its duty if he did come back to Eskom. And it is at that point that he said to me, what do we need to do to bring him back? And I said, there's no way that he can come back. He's just, he doesn't belong in Eskom. By that time, I had discovered just exactly what the man had been involved in terms of the tender manipulations, etc. And he said to me, name your price, and we will do whatever you say. And I said, there's no price that will make me help you get him back. The next minute, and I don't know the precise timing, it happened quite quickly. The next minute he says to me, I'll offer you 800 million if you help us, and we'll do whatever you say. And I looked at him And I said, "Don't be ridiculous." And I actually scoffed and burst out laughing and got into my car and just drove away. I was quite, I was quite shocked.
Okay, that was your third meeting
Yes,
with him. And then the next one was the one towards the end of July.
yes.
This encounter, this third meeting, have you included it in any statements that you have made?
I told Parliament about it. It didn't make it into the public arena, because it was overshadowed by my meeting with Ajay Gupta.
But was it in a statement that you submitted to Parliament?
It was in
Don't seem
in my consultations with the evidence leader.
Yeah, but was it in the statement? Because I don't seem to remember seeing it.
I did not do a formal affidavit to Parliament because they called me so quickly. And also because of what you have from me as a statement is actually what the evidence leader called an evidence guide. So I didn't make any affidavit to Parliament. The transcript would contain what I said.
And then in July, how did the one that happened in July 2017 come about?
That was subsequent to this meeting. Salim Essa then called me.
Who called you?
Salim Essa,
Yes.
the very Salim Essa, he called me. And I must admit, Mr. Chairman, I was quite, surprised, and I was morbidly curious as to why he would call me after I had turned him down.
Yes, that's about how long after your third meeting with him?
It would have been about a month later.
Yes,
So he called me, and that's when he talked about the Malefe matter. And how's it going with the Malefe matter? And I said, Brian's going to lose that matter.
You said?
Brian is going to lose that matter.
Yes.
Okay.
The matter was in court?
Yes, it was.
Yes,
And then he said to me, "Can we meet for coffee?" And I must admit, I was curious as to why would you want to meet with me for coffee now? I told you I don't want anything to do with you. And he just said, "Let's just, have coffee." Then once again, it was arranged for the African Pride Hotel. It's in Melrose Arch. And that he arranged to meet with me in the reception. I went...
At his office?
No, at the hotel.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so it was not in his office. We met there, and then he took me, he said, let's go to, I'm not sure how it came about in terms of let's walk to the office. And I said to him, well, I don't have much time. I have another appointment. We walked. What I thought were offices were in fact townhouses. They were behind Melrose Arch. In the precinct, because we could literally walk from the hotel to the apartment, to that block. And he opened the door, and we walked into a lounge type area, And in the lounge area,
This is now before you could have the coffee that he said you should have.
that's correct.
Okay. So were you now going to an apartment?
Well, I only found out when he opened the door that it was an apartment. I then realized, I thought it was
You
an,
didn't ask where you were going to have this coffee.
well, he had said, let's walk, and I thought it was an office in the direction that he was going. Because that's what it looks like from the outside. There was a restaurant in front of it. I think there's an Ocean Basket, and there's, you know, there are a couple of restaurants in front. So I thought it was an office. As he opened the door, I then realized that this was actually not an office. It was an apartment. As I walked in, the curtains were drawn, so it was not very brightly lit. But in this room, in the lounge area, was Ajay Gupta, Dudazani Zuma, Minister Ben Martins, and an Asian lady that I couldn't remember her name because they did introduce me to these people. At that stage, I was in total shock as to what I had walked into. Salim then continued to introduce me to Ajay Gupta and to Dudazani Zuma, and to, obviously, I knew Minister Ben Martins, so I greeted him, and to the lady that was there. He then asked me to sit down. And I think Salim explained to him in Hindi vernacular, Indian vernacular, I'm not sure which language it would be, but he explained something to Mr. Gupta, and then Mr. Gupta sort of sat back and said, he replied something also in the vernacular that I couldn't understand. The next question was, you know, Salim Essa then said to me, just tell Ajay what was, well, he gestured to Mr. Gupta, tell him what was happening with Brian's case. I just said, in terms of process, I said we were going to see the Deputy Judge President's office the next week, which was, I think it was the 1st or the 2nd of August. The date had not yet been confirmed, and that we would be discussing the case management of the matter. And I didn't say anything else. Mr. Gupta then responded, but not in particular to me. I think he was talking to the people in the room, you know. He just said, this, you know, we would need to find someone in the Deputy Judge President, DJP's office to move this case out. And what was more significant for me, I mean, that was already one of the shocking statements, but then the next one he said was, when this matter would be easier to deal with when Nkosazana Zuma comes into power. And it was at that moment that I realized that whatever skepticism I had had about the Gupta family, the influence on the country issues. You know, this was it. I didn't need any more evidence. I was not, I thought, you know, forget whatever else you wanted to know. This was it. I tried to stay as composed as possible because I was extremely, I mean, all sorts of thoughts went through my head. You know, was this a trap? What were they wanting? I'd already turned them down. Are they going to kill me? You know, because here I am in a place nobody knows. Because I had told my family I'm going to Melrose Arch. You know, would they find me? So all those things go through your head when you're sitting there. And I had Mr. Zuma sitting on my right-hand side. And I was like, okay, you know, just get out of here. And if you read my testimony, you'll see that I described Ajay Gupta sitting there in an old t-shirt and a tracksuit and bare feet. And that just made me even more angry and he was unshaven, very slovenly. And I'm thinking, this man is sitting here and thinking that he owns the country, the way that he was speaking. He was quite dismissive after that. He spoke to Mr. Essa, once again in vernacular, and he just, you know, he took his hand and just dismissed me like that. And he walked me out to the door, Mr. Essa, and I just walked away. I tried to get away as fast as possible, got into my car and went home. It took me quite a while to process what had happened. I really didn't speak to anybody about it until I spoke much later to my attorneys as to what was going on.
Mr. Selega, I know you wanted to come to this meeting, but I wanted to hear about the other meetings as well. But here we are now.
Yeah, no, Chair, that's perfectly in order with me, because that kills many birds with one stone, if I may say so. Ms. Daniels, the meetings you had, particularly after the second meeting, where Mr. Matela Koko asked you to go with him to Melrose Arch, you say, and you are simply made to sit outside the boardroom where they have a meeting. Didn't you, this is early 2017, at that time you are the company secretary. In 2017, let me see.
Yes, I was also acting head of legal.
Yeah, company secretary and acting head of legal.
Yes.
Now that's fairly two senior positions. And you are accountable to the board. As a company secretary, you attend board meetings. You have been working, at least until that point, directly for, when I say working, you have been working in the office of Dr. Ben Gubani. Yeah, your yeses will have to be recorded.
Oh, my apology. Yes, that is correct.
Yes. Do you tell the board about this thing?
Mr. Chairman, at that point in time, I did not believe that the board was bona fide.
But this is around early 2017.
Yes,
You say you did not believe at that time that the board was bona fide.
yes.
Continue, Ms.
Well, what do you mean by that?
From about late late 2016, there were a number of incidents that, well, more particularly, it started with the Public Protector's report, where
The state of capture report,
the state of capture report,
which was released at the end of October 2016.
I think, yes. Yeah. The board had received a summons in respect of appearing before the Public Protector
That is prior to the report
prior to the report being
made
released.
released.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it was a very short space of time. And we did motivate for an extension of time. But what the previous Public Protector did ask for were the conflict of interest registers, which I was the custodian, my office was the custodian of. So we had, the registers for each meeting. I then compiled that for the Public Protector. And it was through that the first signs of the conflict and the various conflicts of the people were then exposed. And I had released those reports, those documents to the Public Protector without informing the board. Now, my reasoning for doing that was, firstly, I had been summoned by the Public Protector, so I really did not have any reason to explain to the board why I was doing that, because I was compelled by law to do that. Secondly, I felt that these were real-time records. So once you completed it, there was no need to change it. It was at each meeting, and there was regularly, when you as a director had to update your records, you would inform me. And I would ask at each meeting if there were changes. So for me, there was no need to actually ask permission. And I gave that to the Public Protector. So it came out obviously in the report, the difference. And I think from that moment, the tension between myself and the board escalated, because many of the implicated board members were extremely irate that I had not asked permission. And I said I didn't need permission. These were company records, So that was the beginning of sort of that kind of tension. It escalated with issues such as bank accounts being frozen, where one of the board members actually, there was a meeting where the minister was called, Minister Lynn Brown was called. She in fact was on a telephone conference where the board members were complaining that their bank accounts were being investigated and that they were being declared politically exposed persons, etc. And it was at that point that she came on the call there was a decision that she would assist where possible, and I'm not quite sure how that meeting ended, but subsequent to that meeting that very day, one of the board directors called me and said to me that she was extremely angry because her accounts, I think it was Nedbank who was threatening to freeze her accounts. And she said to me that if these people think that I'm going down alone, they have another thing coming. This board is owned, everybody knows that this board is a Gupta board. And I will make sure that everybody knows. And I
Which member of the board said that to you?
do I have to
I was about to ask the same question.
Yes.
No, I'm saying to her, I was about to ask the same question, Chair. Your microphone is off, Chair.
Oh, if it's a matter that in respect of which no 3-3 notice has been sent out, she can tell me next time, but she must tell me at some stage. Okay.
Yes, because...
There's no 3-3 notice that has gone out?
No.
No, we don't. She hasn't told us the name.
Okay, okay,
No.
all right. Don't tell me now, but you'll tell me next time.
All right.
Okay, all right. So one of the board members said that to you.
Yes, and I was actually quite speechless. She ended the call, and she phoned me back, I think it must have been about an hour later, and said,
This is now, it's still that same meeting, Mr. Selega, that you were asking about?
No, she's... No.
Okay, go back
Ms.
to
Daniels?
the meeting that Mr. Selega asked you about.
oh, Mr. Chairman, I'm responding to
My question.
Mr. Selega's question as to why did I not go to the board?
As to?
Why did I not go to the board?
Oh, okay, all right, yeah.
And so unfortunately now it's taken...
Okay, all right, just respond to that question.
Shall we rather go to the... So I had asked you the question after your second encounter with Mr. Koko and Mr. Essa, where you are taken to Melrose Arch, they leave you outside the boardroom, they go into a boardroom meeting. Why didn't you... Well, I said, did you raise the issue with the board? Your answer was no, because at that time the board...
Well, I didn't trust the board any longer.
So, and you are going on to explain why.
And that's why I was
Those are
moving
your
on to...
reasons.
Okay.
Okay. Well,
Continue, Mr. Selega.
Thank you, Chair. Let's accelerate to what I believe is the fourth meeting. And this my assessment is that this meeting gives us the connection between Mr. Salim Essa and the Guptas.
Yes. When you talk about the fourth meeting, I assume you talk about the July...
So that's
meeting.
late July meeting where you have described and behind Melrose Arch, the townhouses, the apartment, and so on.
Yes, yes.
So that establishes the connection between the two.
Yes.
So we know now that they're working together.
Yes.
And I didn't follow your narration. You were called by Mr. Salim Essa. That's what you said?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Where are you when he calls you?
I was either at home or...
Or at work? Or
No,
wherever?
I wasn't at work.
You were not at work?
I wasn't at work.
So would this have been on over a weekend?
Yes, this was over the weekend.
Over a weekend. So he calls you and you oblige?
Yes.
You go to Melrose Arch?
Yes, the The African Pride Hotel.
African Pride
Hotel.
Hotel. Well, the obvious question follows, why did you go?
Well, Mr. Chairman, as I earlier alluded to, I was actually morbidly curious at this point. This was the same.
No, Ms. Daniels, you couldn't have gone there out of curiosity. No, you couldn't.
Let me explain.
I mean, this is the man that told you in 2015 about executives that he said would be suspended, and you were shocked because he's not part of ESCOM. And on your version, Mr. Koko couldn't explain why he brought you there. You were unhappy about that. And now you say about 2 years later, he calls you over a weekend, you agree to go where he wants you to go because you are curious?
No, Mr. Chairman, remember I told you about the meeting in the parking lot at the fuel station.
Yes.
At that meeting, he had offered me 800 million rand.
All the more reason why you should want to have nothing to do with him. And you say after that, after he has offered you 800 million rand, corruption, you say he called you over a weekend, you agree to go and meet him because you are curious?
Well, I found it quite astounding that someone that I had turned down so flatly.
Sorry?
I say I found it quite astounding that someone that I turned down so flatly.
You should not be wanting to talk to that person after that, Ms. Daniels. You should not be wanting to take his calls after he has offered you.
Sadly, we withdraw there when things are getting quite hot there between Judge Raymond Zondo and the testimonial witness. We're going to say goodbye. Of course, we'll have more on point for you tomorrow. And of course, at the top of the hour, we have SA Today with more news for you. Do take care.
Over a weekend. Out of curiosity?
I really was, curious, because I couldn't understand why would he want to have anything to do with me.
Continue, Mr. Slega.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and Ms. Daniels, you go there. Well, I've said this morning that one will find it strange that these people kept on calling you to these meetings. Either they believed that you were with them, or either they knew that, or that they really trusted you as one of their confidants. How do you clear that
Well,
perception?
like I said earlier, I did not participate in.
You did not what?
I did not participate in the Saxonwold visits. I was not offered bags of cash or provided with bags of cash.
But you were offered.
They were off.
Well, that was late 2017, Mr. Chairman. It was a different time. It was in my view, it was more an act of desperation. The bank accounts were being
Does it
frozen.
make any difference? Does that make any difference?
Well, for me, the timing of it, was just an act of desperation.
Does that make any difference to the fact that that was corruption?
Well, I did not accept it.
Yes, but in offering you, if that is true, that was corruption. In offering you that money in order for you to do wrong, was it not?
Yes.
So does the fact that they were making this offer in desperation make any difference?
No, that doesn't make any difference. But in the context, because, I mean, the reasoning for the bribe was really to help get Machela Koko to be Chief Executive Officer of ESCOM.
So you had some understanding of why they were offering you 800 million rand,
That's what he said at the time.
and you could understand what they were doing.
Yes, that's what he said.
They wanted to get Mr. Mokoko to be CEO.
Yes. And Mr. Essa said, well, I had promised Mr. Koko, well, he said I'd promised Machela that he would be CEO.
Yes, that is Mr. Issa saying that.
Mr. Essa saying that. And
Yes.
that's when I said, well, that's one promise you will not be able to keep.
Mr. Selega?
Thank you, Chairperson. So this meeting where you are called by, to which you are called by Mr. Essa himself directly, which means he has your telephone number, he could access you, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You didn't block his number.
I did after the July meeting.
Not prior to that.
No.
You say it was about, the discussion was about Mr. Brown Molifa's case. Which case was that?
It was the pension matter.
The pension payout to him.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you know whether what was said about they will try to get somebody in the office of the Deputy Judge President, whether they acted upon that?
I'm not sure.
What you are not aware, you are not sure, did you come to know about it?
It was much later, but not, Mr. Chair, much later, one of my colleagues told me that the DPJ actually did institute an investigation in his office based on the testimony that I gave in Parliament. He did investigate, but I'm not sure if I understand what you're asking, if it
Whether there
happened.
was interference,
Yes.
for lack of a better word.
Yes.
Do you know whether there was interference?
No, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. I see in your affidavit, you talk about, in paragraph 30 of the affidavit, about political interference. I was quite used to the amount of political interference and lobbying behind the scenes. Would you like to enlighten the Commission what has been referred to there as political interference?
Can you just repeat the paragraph? for me?
Paragraph 30, page 7. At the top of page 7.
Mr. Chairman, I joined ESCOM in 2006. And from inception, there was quite a contestation around procurement matters and just general interference in the day-to-day running of the utility. My first experience of that was with the old order mining rights that ESCOM had acquired. As ESCOM, it had old order mining rights, which when the new laws came into being, that needed to be converted. And as I was in primary energy, I was tasked with coordinating and preparing those applications for conversion of mining rights. It was a significant amount of mining rights. It would, and this is my personal belief, it would, because they were coal mining rights, it would have given Eskom access to its own coal mines, and it would have alleviated a lot of the coal issues that we now experience as a country. However, we went through a series of, applications. I together with the then Chief Executive Officer, I think it was first Mr. Marocha and then Mr. Damas, we went through having to submit these applications to the DMR, then known as the Department of Mineral Resources. At that stage, I think I was on the eve of submitting the documents for consideration when I was told not to submit those documents, as a political solution would be found to those issues. Those mining rights ended up in the hands of private companies, and Eskom began the fight of trying to get them back with no avail. There was also then unofficial policy statements that Eskom cannot own a mine. So that was one of my first experiences of political interference on the part of the shareholder, as I call it. There were also others when they were in procurement, when there were tenders, we were told, so-and-so is behind it. Follow process, make sure that you do this. I recall in 2011 specifically, I was asked to put together a list of the top 100 suppliers of Eskom, together with their contact details and the person at the company, because the minister wanted to do an ANC fundraising campaign. I still have that database, but I was asked to prepare it, and it was handed to the minister. Further things like there were instructions to the board around not following the Public Finance, not the Public Finance Managing Act, the triple PFA. Eskom had an exemption to the triple, which is the Preferential Procurement Framework Act. It was due to expire. Minister Gigaba and Minister Gordhan on the last couldn't agree on the extension, because Minister Gigaba was Public Enterprises and Minister Gordhan was the Minister of Finance. So on the eve of the expiration of the exemption, we get a notice that says the exemption is no longer valid, will not be extended. Minister Gigaba tells the board, do not follow the instruction. Us as officials say, you can't do that, that's breaking the law. You get the board in that tussle. And there are many more examples of that kind of interference in the granting of tenders. The first nuclear tender was also, the parties were going to sign. Minister Gigaba says, no, we will not, you will not sign it. The parties were actually at the signing ceremony. Yeah. So there was quite a lot of that kind of interference from the ministry, from various political parties. The chairman would get lots of, meat with this one. So what I'm saying is we had always been instructed, when you get this kind of instruction, follow process.
Yes.
Do not waver, follow process.
But who would have told you that?
Whoever my boss was at the time.
So would Mr. Den Murakane have told you that?
In
Because he was
procurement-
once your boss as well.
Yes. So we would, make sure that we followed the process.
Yeah, but answer my question. Would Mr. Den Marugane have said that to you?
He had on occasion, yes, because we had some interference.
Okay, but, like the chairperson has been pointing out, some of these things don't appear in your affidavit.
Well, the affidavit was about suspensions and...
Yeah, because they will have to be notified about this thing so that they can respond to it. So, I think, Chair, if I may propose to the witness, you may
Yes.
have to do an affidavit elaborating on those
Yes,
those
yeah.
political interferences
So that
Okay.
it can be served on the
parties.
affected parties.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
But, Ms. Daniels, what we see from the documentation we went through this morning is that if you're talking political interference, there's more than just political interference. If regard is to be had to the newspaper, the resolution regarding the newspaper houses, City Press, Sunday Times, and Mail and Guardian, then came from outside to the board, sent to Mr. Ben Gubane, it becomes a resolution of the board. That's another interference, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. That interference took...
That is like somebody outside of the board is effectively controlling what decisions the board may or should take in regard to those newspapers.
Yes,
Yeah. And he said, this is the position you must take, and they adopt that position.
yes.
You would know, I haven't referred you to it, but I did refer you to when Dr. Ngubane testified. It's an email Mr. Koko receives about the guarantee, which was firstly a prepayment, 1.68 billion rand, regarding Tegeta, to be paid to Tegeta. And there's an email there from Mr. Koko, rather from businessman to Mr. Koko, then Mr. Koko forwards you that email. Recall that email that talked about the guarantee?
Yes,
You recall that? That too came from businessman into ESCOM through Mr. Koko to you, ultimately made its way. Was it the board or the BTC?
it was the Investment and Finance Committee and then the board.
Then the board.
Yes,
So that too, it's an indication of an interference from outside.
yes,
So this board was being controlled by outside forces, if you like, in inverted commas. Outside persons outside of ESCOM. Whether it be Mr. Richard Seleke, he's outside of ESCOM, whether it's Salim Esa, it's outside of ESCOM, and they were writing these emails, putting proposals together and feeding them to the board. You follow?
yes,
It was a control from outside.
yes,
And certainly in relation to the email that contained a draft of what position the board should take with regard to the City Press, Sunday Times, and the Mail and Guardian, the chairperson did not take exception to this whole thing, that somebody from outside is sending him and a draft of what position the board should take. Is that right?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
He did not object to that.
No, he did not.
Instead, he said you must prepare a resolution based on that draft.
Yes.
Okay.
And in addition to that, if your testimony is to go by, the evidence you testified at the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, it's in your statement, it's in your affidavit, that on the 10th of March you were at Melrose Arch, and you are being told 4 executives, names I mentioned, are going to be suspended. Again, an indication of outside interference.
Yes, that is correct.
It's more than outside interference, it's outside control. Isn't it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to also add that, in the beginning, I didn't quite believe that 3 brothers would control the state in the manner that they did. That would become clearer as we go along, as I went along in my journey. And that is precisely why I started speaking to the media, firstly anonymously, because I wasn't sure, there was such an element of mistrust at work. I did speak to my colleagues, but because of that atmosphere, that you did not know who was loyal to who, it was very difficult to speak to people inside. Even matters that were, sort of reported to the whistleblowing line, the executives would know who they were talking about. That would become knowledge. So that line was not very secure. I started anonymously talking to some of the journalists in the beginning, because I really didn't know where to take the information.
Why didn't you resign from ESCOM?
It was very difficult. I did approach the recruitment agencies. The fact that I had worked at ESCOM was a blight on my record, so that made it difficult. I am a single parent, so it wasn't that easy just to walk out of a job and not have a job.
I see.
So I think those were the compelling, what shall I say, the competing interests at the time for me. But it was quite a difficult terrain to master, because most of the people, just ignored what one would say.
Yes.
Internally, and it would only become clearer later that there were stakeholders. Or
What, interested parties?
Interested parties in what was happening.
Yeah.
And that made it difficult.
Interested parties. What? Interested parties within ESCOM or outside of ESCOM, or both?
It would be both.
Okay, let's go to the suspension of the executive, because they are suspended on the 11th of November. And as I understand from the affidavit, were not part of the meetings that led to their suspensions.
No, I was not.
But you attended the one of the 9th of March, didn't you?
No, I did not.
Oh, I thought I read something. I read your. Oh, maybe I misread.
No.
Yeah. Okay. No.
Mr.
maybe
Chairman,
it was
what you,
somebody else's name.
yes,
Yeah.
what you would have read is that, maybe just for a point of clarification, when I became company secretary, those minutes had not been signed for a year. So myself and the board secretary had to work through those. And we prepared them for the board, for the 2015 board, for want of a better word. And that's why it took so long for those minutes to be signed, because we had to listen to all of the tapes. We had to then, I prepared a pack for each board member to make sure that they could tell us that what was in those minutes, because we were not present. So I think the reason I refer to them in my affidavit is because I did read them.
Okay.
So you had access to the audios of those meetings?
Some of them, yes.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the minutes which are being referred to here, the 9th of March 2011, and then the meetings of 11 March 2011, I beg your pardon, 2015. Well, the Commission has obtained audios of those meetings, so you would also have had access to them.
Yeah,
So you would have listened to that.
Yeah, at ESCOM. I split it between myself and the board secretary.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Now that you've raised that, let me ask you, do you know why the minutes would not have been constructed a week after the meeting took place?
Mr. Chairman, that period was...
No, just answer my question. Do you know, yes or no?
No.
You don't know?
No.
Why they would not have been constructed
Yeah.
within a week after the meeting took place?
No.
Yeah. So you had to do that exercise a year later?
Yes.
And the minutes are signed by Dr. Ngubane.
Yes, that is correct.
He would have had to ensure that those minutes, what you bring to him as a draft minutes, which he has to sign, is a correct reflection of what took place in the meeting.
That is correct, but the process was even more detailed than that.
Yeah, tell the chairperson.
Mr. Chairman, what we did
Briefly.
was we compiled, once we had, they were draft minutes. So once we had put them together in the necessary format, each board member received a pack. And each board member was given the opportunity to comment on whether we had correctly captured those minutes. And once that had been done, I then prepared a pack for Dr. Ngubane, and it was actually first approved at one of the board meetings before he signed them off.
Thank you. You have stated in your affidavit that in the morning of 11 March 2015,
Hang on, Mr. Selega. Okay, please continue.
Thank you, Chair. In the morning of 11 March 2015, Mr. Koko called you in rapid succession, and one of the things he spoke with you about, or rather raised with you, was the concerns that you had called two people, and he was asking you, why did you speak to them?
Yes, he did.
One being your friend, and the other one being, he said, the Frenchman.
Yes.
Yeah. But, we have obtained the a telephone record between you and him in which we see that there is a telephone call from him to you the evening before, the night before, in 3 minutes before 10. And I was curious to know, you didn't mention anything about that, and him, at least that night, questioning you about who you were speaking to on your way back home. Do you think you have an explanation for that?
Mr. Chairman, I don't recall speaking to him about the conversations that happened the next morning. But it was very possible that he would have called me at that time. He had no respect for personal boundaries and personal time. So I don't recall exactly what that call would have been about, but it was definitely not about the telephone calls. What I can, if I look back at that day, the most important types of things were like he was trying to finish off certain transactions, and more than likely they would have pertained to that.
Yes. Ms. Daniels, there is an occasion, for lack of a better word, immediately after the suspension of the executives, where you talk about you meeting with Dr. Pat Naidu. Can you tell the chairperson a little bit about that? How you meet with Dr. Naidu? Who is Dr. Pat Naidu?
Dr. Pat Naidu is was one of the board members at the time. He was also the chairperson of the Bold Recovery and
You deal with it in paragraph 42 to 46 of your affidavit.
Bold Recovery and Bold Program Committee. So I was called to a meeting with him. He asked to see me, and he wanted to know what would be the process to appoint Mr. Nick Linnell. He said that...
So which day is this? Sorry.
This was on the 13th of March, 2015.
Thank you. Carry on.
So I explained the process to Dr. Naidu in terms of we would need to issue a request for a quotation or a request for a proposal. Dr. Naidu listened and seemed to be a bit impatient about the process, because for me, my impression was that they had already appointed Mr. Linnell and now needed to regularize the process.
Was that your impression?
That was my impression.
What did he convey to you that they were already engaging? The
Yes.
board was already engaging with Mr. Linnell?
Yes, he did. He did say that to me. In fact, you will see in paragraph 43, I think he had said the board had acquired the services of Mr. Nick Linnell.
Do you recall or not whether Mr. Linnell was ever formally appointed by the board?
I did not see a formal letter of appointment, Mr. Chairman, but what I do know is that I was called upon to cancel the contract
And
with Mr. Linnell.
you were called upon to cancel Mr. Linnell's contract.
Yes.
Do you recall when about was this?
This was late April, I think.
What, 2015?
It was in 2015.
Are you looking for a document?
Yes, I'm just looking for SMD 3.
SMD 3 is on page 32. Page 32, 33.
See, Mr. Linnell's letter is dated the 14th of April, Mr. Chairman, so it would have been around, it would have been subsequent to that letter.
So SMD 3 is an annexure to your affidavit. The document is a letter dated 14 April 2015 from the project office, Business Improvement Delivery. It's signed on the face of it, what appears to be by Mr. Nick Linnell, designation as director.
Yes, that's
Is that
correct.
the document you're referring to?
That's the document I'm referring to.
And the letter is addressed to Acting Chairperson, Dr. Baldwin Sipho Ngubani, ESCOM SOE. Dear Chairperson, appointment of coordinator of the ESCOM inquiry. Two options, Ms. Daniels. I could read the letter, or you could give the Chairperson the gist of what is contained in the letter.
I could give the gist, if that suits the chairman. I am not sure.
Yeah, what is Mr. Nick Linnell writing about in this letter?
What Mr. Linnell is writing about in this letter is the attendances that he did on behalf of the board in setting up the inquiry and in participating in being part of the meetings. He was also to draw up the terms of reference for the inquiry that was to follow. And then it later, I think it appeared in the newspapers that he was no longer going to be coordinating. And that is when he wrote this letter to the acting chairperson, Dr. Ngubani.
So in the last two paragraphs of his letter, he writes, "It is clear from written correspondence and public statements that the board appointed me to fulfill this role. It is now also apparent from the media reports that the board has since allegedly terminated that appointment. In the circumstances, I would be grateful if you would advise me of the position of the board with regard to my appointment, and if my services have, as publicly stated, been summarily terminated, how the board would like me to account for my services rendered. Yours sincerely." What did you want to tell the chairperson about this? Oh, you were talking about you were called upon to terminate his contract or his appointment. Subsequently. Yeah.
Yes, based on that. He did issue an invoice to ESCOM, and ESCOM paid it.
Yes.
Yeah, how much was that? Are you able to remember?
I think it was in the region of about 160,000.
Okay.
Yes. Chair, I think we have that invoice in the bundle
Yes,
somewhere.
okay, no, that's fine.
Yeah. Ms. Daniel, the next issue or the next aspect where you feature is in regard to the exit negotiations. You call them exit negotiations of the executives. And you say you attended some of the meetings, the delegation that the board had mandated to have settlement discussions with the executives had.
Yes,
You
that's
recall
correct.
that? Did you find that in the relevant paragraphs in your affidavit?
Yes, that was paragraph 56.
Yes. Now, are you aware or not that Dr. Ngubane had also been authorized by the board to attend at the CCMA in regard to the labor dispute of Mr. Matuna? If you don't know, you don't know.
Yes, I actually am aware that he had to attend.
My recollection may be inaccurate, Mr. Seleng. I got the impression that what he said, that is Dr. Ngubane, when he gave evidence, that he had gone to the CCMA on his own and not because he was representing the board.
You are correct, Chair.
That was my impression.
Chair, you are correct. That's what he said before the
Yes.
chairperson.
Yes,
And we were pursuing that issue with him because,
yes,
and we will do so.
yes, and I think I do recall that I think Mr. Matona said Dr. Ngubane was part of the board's delegation or representatives.
Correct,
in regard
Chairperson.
To the negotiations with him.
That's correct, Chair.
But that I think Dr. Ngubane, when he gave evidence, seemed to deny that. I hope my recollection is accurate.
It is absolutely accurate, Chair, and it's an issue, Chair, you will find, can I give you the page reference?
Yes.
In Dr. Ngubane's bundle. Oh, no, it's even in, yes, it's even in this bundle, Chairperson.
Yes.
Yeah, let's do that. Chair, you can read it so that you clarify, you
Yeah.
clear your mind.
I won't read it now, but if you tell me that it's there,
That's right.
That's enough for me. Yeah, because that's my recollection that he
Yes,
said he went to the CCMA
Yes.
on his own. He was not representing the board.
yes,
And that he said he was not involved
yes.
in the negotiations with Mr. Matona.
Can I just read his statement
Yeah,
to you, Chair?
yeah.
He says, whilst the inquiry was pending, Mr. Matuna had filed a labor dispute. Following the conclusion of the inquiry, Matuna negotiated and settled the dispute. Prior to that, that's paragraph 4.29 of his affidavit. Prior to that, I have been tasked by the board to attend the CCMA proceedings which Mr. Matuna had instituted against ESCOM.
Oh, then my recollection was incorrect.
No, your recollection is correct.
Yeah, in terms of what he said
That's
on the
correct.
witness stand.
That's correct, Chair.
But are you reading from his affidavit?
From his affidavit before us.
So
before
his
this commission.
affidavit says he was tasked by the board
He says that.
to go to the CCMA.
Correct, Chair.
But in the witness stand, he said he went there on his own. Okay.
Your recollection is perfect, Chairperson. So, Ms. Suzanne, Ms. Daniels, I shouldn't have read that statement to you, but you already says, you know, that he was, what did you say, Ms. Daniels?
Well, she said you asked the question whether she was aware that the board had tasked Dr. Ngubane to attend the CCMA, and she said yes. But you must tell me if I misunderstood you, or if that's not what you intended saying.
I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman. If my memory serves me correctly, he also had to depose to the affidavit
Where?
in the Matona matter.
But let's clear this first. Did you say you were aware that he had been tasked by the board, or did you say you were not aware of that, but you were aware that he did go to the CCMA?
He did go to, I was aware that he did go to the CCMA.
Yes, but whether he had been asked by the board or not, you don't know?
Yeah,
Or did you know?
that I'm not sure of at that
Okay.
stage.
Okay.
No, thank you. I mean, Mr. Ngubane will tell us. He's already told us himself. So, but you are then involved, not involved, but you are invited into settlement or exit, you call them, negotiations, that the delegation, the delegation as we understand is Dr. Ngubane, and you can confirm that, Dr. Ngubane, Mr. Romeo Kumalo, and Ms. Venita Klein. And in respect of, I think, Mr. Den Marukani, Mr. Zitembe Koza, and Mr. Romeo Kumalo were the delegation.
The board appointed Mrs. Klein, Mr. Kamalo, Dr. Ngubane, and Mr. Koza
As the delegation.
as the delegation.
I didn't hear the first one.
Mrs. Klein,
Okay.
Mr. Kamalo, Dr. Ngubane,
Yeah.
and Mr. Koza as the delegation.
Yeah.
So it was a delegation of 4.
Yes. 1, 2, 3. Yes.
Okay. And were they meant to engage in negotiations with all the executives who had been suspended?
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, okay, all right.
Were you in the meeting where the delegation was appointed?
I don't think I was in the meeting.
So-
That was,
Okay.
but what I do know is because I had to deal with them.
They have testified as well
Yeah.
that they were, well, only 2. So you know because you had to deal with them.
Yes.
You attended the meetings where negotiations took place.
I attended the meetings. I took notes at the meetings. I also had to arrange the meetings. And in some instances, I liaised with the suspended executives to get them to the meeting.
So let's deal with Mr. Matuna, for instance, by way of example. So when you say you had to arrange the meetings, you would have called him and said to him, we have this date, this time, this place for a meeting to discuss. Would you say also what to be discussed, what was to be discussed?
I would not at that stage have told him what would be discussed, but Mr. Chairman, but I would have told him that the board delegation would like to meet with him.
And you said they met at Protea Hotel in Midrand.
Yes, it was a neutral ground away from Megawatt Park. So I arranged it at, yes, the Protea Hotel in Madrid.
What do you recall was the discussion with him?
I'll have to, can I refer to my...
I'm sorry, before you get there, in paragraph 54 of your affidavit, you say the board emphasized that this would not alter the fact that he would remain on suspension. I think you're talking about Mr. Matona there. And then you say Dr. Ben Ngubane and Mr. Romeo Kumalo were mandated to meet with Mr. Matona on 29 April 2015 to discuss the matter of his suspension. So here it looks like you are saying only two members of the board were mandated to discuss with Mr. Matona.
Yes, Mr. Chair. What they did as a group, they would decide who would talk to whom.
The group of 4.
Yes.
They then divided the job among themselves.
Yes.
To say who of them would meet with who in terms of the executives.
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, okay. All right. And then you say in the next sentence, at this point it was clear that the board was not really considering the option of the return of these executives, contrary to their public utterances. You see that statement?
Yes.
Is that true?
That is, from what I witnessed, Mr. Chairman, there was absolutely no intention of those executives returning.
What is the basis for you to come to that conclusion?
The manner in which the discussions were conducted, except for there was a marked change when they dealt with Machela Koko. But for the three executives, Mr. Matona, Ms. Molefe, and Mr. Marokani, there was a totally different tone and posture in terms of how they would deal with it.
Are you talking about tone at the meetings that representatives of this group of four had with those individual executives?
Yes, I am.
Yes. But I thought that I understood the statement to relate to, one, the board, and to relate to something that would have happened before the delegation could meet with the executives. It gives the impression that even before the delegation met with the executives individually, you are saying that it was clear that the board was really not considering the option of the executives coming back. That's how I understand it. Is that
That's what I'm seeking to convey.
Yes.
Based on, I did bring my notes.
Yes.
Because at the meeting of the 23rd of April, 2015.
Is that a meeting of the board?
That's a meeting of the board.
Yeah.
Which there are no recordings.
Is that the meeting where the board mandated the four to be the ones to negotiate with the executives?
I think that happened earlier, if I recall.
Okay. But there was a meeting of the board on the 23rd of April.
Yes.
2015.
Yes.
And you say it was clear to you, it was clear on that day that the board was not really considering the option of the return of these executives.
Yes.
Yeah, and what is the basis for you to have come to that conclusion? Because you can't obviously rely for that on what happened subsequently when the delegation met with the executives. What is it that had happened or that was happening at the time of that meeting of the 23rd of April that made you believe that the board was not going to entertain the return of these executives?
I have my handwritten notes.
Yes.
From the meeting of that
Yes.
date. I have made available.
Is it notes that you made at the meeting?
At the meeting, contemporaneous notes.
Or contemporaneous notes? Okay, are those notes you have not previously given to the commission?
I provided it yesterday, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry?
I provided it yesterday, but we have spoken about it.
It may well be, Mr. Selega, that it's something she can deal with next time.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So when they have had a chance to look at those notes,
Yes.
then when you come back, one of the questions you can deal with is, what was the basis for you to say that it was clear that the board did not contemplate that the executives would come back? Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
All right.
Ms. Daniels, then let's rather go into the meetings where there are settlement discussions and you are present, these are meetings you say you had arranged.
I'm sorry, Mr. Slager. Did you say, Ms. Daniels, there are no audio recordings for the meeting of the 23rd of April?
That is what I'm led to understand.
That's what you are made to understand.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
And minutes? They would be there.
There are minutes of the meeting.
Yes.
But from my notes, it seems that this was an in-committee
Yes.
meeting.
Okay.
I was not the company secretary at that
Yes.
stage, but
Yeah.
I still
Okay.
took notes.
Yes. No, that's fine. Continue.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Slager. I just wanted to understand.
Yes.
How, yeah.
Yes, now, I was certainly going to go to that point, Chair, because the minutes, what on the face of it appears to be the minutes, has been attached by Ms. Daniels. There are certain things that Ms. Daniels states in her affidavit that are not apparent from those minutes. Hence, she has then only yesterday scanned and emailed copies of what she says are her handwritten notes. So we are yet to deal with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So, but, I mean, similarly, there will be no minutes of this next meetings we are going into.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's fine. Yeah.
Ms. Daniels, I understood from your affidavit that even though you attended meetings of 3 of the executives, you did not attend the meeting where the delegation met with Mr. Den Marokani.
No, I did not attend the meeting with Mr. Marokani because that would have been a conflict of interest for me. He was my boss, and I had spoken to him about the suspensions, my meeting with Salim Issa. So I did not take part in that.
Or at that time, Mr. Koko was no longer your immediate superior?
He was acting.
Or he was, because he was acting
Acting.
group CEO, he was therefore temporarily not your immediate superior?
No, Mr. Koko was acting in 2015. It's a complex, the organization changed so much.
Okay.
Mr. Marokani and I, he was my direct boss from I think it was 2009
Yes.
until 2015.
Okay.
So that is why I did not
Yeah.
take part in any of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Select.
Yes. Well, I wanted you to explain that to the DCJ because earlier you mentioned that you attended, or maybe it gave the impression that you attended meetings of all 4.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, and I had asked the question, what was in the meeting of Mr. Matuna, what was told to him?
I just want to get to I think the first expression to Mr. Matona was that the court action did not sit well with the powers that be. And I'm quoting because I wrote down exactly what was said.
When he spoke, when he gave evidence, he talked about the day when the CCMA hearing or meeting was postponed. He said that the ESCOM delegation said they wanted to consult with the shareholder or the minister. And then he said there was subsequently a meeting which we referred to as the first meeting, and then another one later on. Now, what you have just told me, does it relate to the day when the CCMA matter was postponed, or does it relate to one of the two meetings he talked about, or some other meeting?
I think this is one of the two meetings that he spoke about, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
This one took place on the 4th of May, 2015.
Would that have been what he called the first meeting?
I am not sure if this would have been the first
From
meet-
your perspective, was it a first meeting for the ESCOM delegation to negotiate with him? Or are you not sure?
It's not clear from... It's not 100% clear from the way that I wrote my notes.
Okay, all right.
There may have been discussion before that.
Yeah. But was it the first one that you
The
attended?
first one that I attended.
Okay, all right. So you said what was the first point made, or?
The first one was that the court action did not sit well with the powers that be.
Who said that?
This was said by Mr. Romeo Kumalo.
Okay. Mr. Selega?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And please carry on, Ms. Daniels.
They then, as I said in my affidavit, Mr. Kumalo then outlined a framework of a proposal to Mr. Matona. And
Outlined a what?
sort of a framework of a proposal
Yeah,
to
okay.
Mr. Matona.
Mm-hmm.
And the proposal included a payment by ESCOM.
I'm sorry. Let's just get this right. Who were at this meeting? You were there. Mr. Romeo Kumar was there. Mr. Matona was there. Who else was there?
Let me just check. I'm just having to check my notes,
Yeah.
if you don't mind.
Well, Ms. Daniels, your affidavit, are you starting with this at paragraph 57?
Okay, this would be Mrs. Klein,
Yes.
Mr. Kumalo,
Yes.
and Dr. Ngobani.
Yes. Okay. And yourself.
Yeah.
What was your role? Was it to advise the delegation on legal matters, or what?
No, at that stage, what Dr. Ngobani wanted me to do was to take notes when he wasn't there. You will recall that he testified that he was going to employee engagement meetings.
Yes.
So he
Okay.
did. So he did.
You were at these meetings that we are talking about of negotiations with the executives at the request and instance of Dr. Ngubane.
Yes.
And your task was to take notes,
Take notes, organize the venue,
the logistics.
the logistics.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I would take instructions from either Dr. Ngobani or Mrs. Klein.
Okay, all right, okay. Continue. The Romeo outlined the framework.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what he was talking about was, and from my notes, it seems like there had been prior discussion because there was no commitment now to a specific role in government because they were talking about his transfer. The financial issue around what proposal they would give him, and the messaging in terms of how would they communicate to the public. And also, then he did say the court action did not sit well with the powers that be, and that one would have to deal with that matter. Mr. Matona then responded.
Can I, just before you go there, Ms. Daniels, let's read your affidavit. There's 2 paragraphs into the record. That is paragraph 64, because they are significant. Page 15 of your affidavit.
Do you want me to read it?
I'll read it.
Okay.
It says, you say, the delegation subsequently met with Mr. Tsidiso Matuna, on the same day. Now, sorry, I've asked you out of sequence of your affidavit, because you started with Ms. Molefe on the 4th of May, and now you carry on, you say on the same day they're meeting with Mr. Matuna.
Yes, that is correct. It was the 4th of May.
And so the delegation doesn't go away, they wait for the next person to come
Yes, there were a series of meetings on the 4th of May
on the 4th of May at the Protea Hotel.
at the Protea Hotel. Yes, that's correct.
So it goes on to say, Mr. Khumalo opened the discussion and emphasized that at that stage there was no commitment to a specific alternative role in government, but that it would be considered. He emphasized that Mr. Matuna's court action did not sit well with the powers that be. There appeared to have been prior discussions that I was not privy to. Mr. Khumalo then proceeded to outline the framework of a proposal to Mr. Matuna. He stressed that ESCOM was committed to managing the messaging together with Mr. Matuna so that his dignity and credibility, as well as the credibility of the board, remained intact. The financial proposal included a payment by ESCOM to the Government Employees Pension Fund to secure Mr. Matuna's full benefit as government employee. Since he had been at ESCOM for a relatively short time, it was confirmed that ESCOM and the Department of Public Enterprises were working together to secure the full benefit, to have it approved and reinstated. The prospect of another role in government was also mooted. Mr. Matuna requested that a formal proposal be tabled and that a further meeting be set up. And you're talking, then you go to the second meeting with Ms. Molefe. But let's go to the meeting with Ms. Molefe, which comes prior to this one. In a nutshell, I know you've set it out in your affidavit. What can you tell the chairperson about that meeting?
Well, Mr. Chairman, at this meeting, this one was led by Mrs. Klein, and she very early on set the tone of the meeting by saying, explaining to Ms. Molefe that this is the delegation that has been put together to talk to the executives, and her question was, how do we amicably find a solution?
Whose question?
Mrs. Klein
Ms. Klein's question to Ms. Molefe.
Molefe,
Yeah.
Ms. Solofelo Molefe, is how do we amicably find a solution? Ms. Molefe obviously responded by saying, you know, this was actually the first time that the board met with Ms. Molefe, or in fact communicated with her, because she said there had been 8 weeks of no communication. And then Mr. Khumalo took over and said, in very direct English, without prejudice and reserving the rights of ESCOM, the terms of reference for the review were developed by the Audit and Risk Committee, and that this was a separate discussion. He went on to say, can we find a way of amicably parting ways? The parties would like to avoid the legal wrangle on each side. Would you consider a managed parting of the ways? Would you be open to this discussion and also the public management thereof?
So how were you able to recall all these details?
I wrote these are my handwritten notes, Mr. Chairman. It's not that I have a super memory, but I did write who said what, and I did make these quotes.
Were those the notes that you would have made available to Dr. Ngubane?
You know, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Gbani actually didn't ask for my notes. If I recall now.
Oh,
Yeah, because I understood that he was asking you to be present in those meetings in order to do exactly that, take notes, so that you could provide him with.
Yes, but if I look back now, he didn't ask me for them.
So,
did you offer them?
I would have given him, you know, verbal feedback, but I think because there was this delegation of the board in any event, that grouping spoke to each other.
well, Ms. Klein did say, she recalled the word, amicable parting being mentioned, or separation. But anyway, they will deal with what you are saying in due course. So Ms. Molefe, according to you, responds, and essentially she required more time.
Yes, she did.
Mr. Matona gave evidence and said that at the first meeting that he had with the ESCOM delegation, after the CCMA, after he had referred the matter to the CCMA and it had been postponed, he said the delegation or one of the people on the ESCOM delegation, and I don't know if he said it was Mr. Kumalo, but he said he was told that, well, one, he said he wanted to return to his job, but he was told in no uncertain terms that that was off the table. That's what he has said. I think Ms. Klein has denied that, if I'm not mistaken.
She
Or
was,
maybe she
yeah.
hasn't. Did you say that in any meeting that you attended, Mr. Matona? That was that said? The part that was said by him, did you say it? And the part that he says was said by somebody from the ESCOM delegation? Did he say that he wanted to get back to his job?
Mr. Matona did say that he wanted his job back.
He did say that.
He did say that.
Yeah. It was their response.
But the response was, you know, the court action didn't sit well. So it was implied that they didn't want him back.
So you were present at a meeting where Mr. Matona said he wanted to get back to his job.
Well, he spoke about, at this meeting of the 4th of May,
Yeah.
he spoke about the impact that this had had on him and that would want his job back. But the discussion did not go that way.
Yes, but do you remember or do you not remember anybody from the ESCOM delegation saying going back to your job is off the table, or words to that effect?
Not at this meeting, Mr. Chair. It
Don't
may
remember
have,
that.
It may have been at a previous meeting,
Yes,
but certainly by the time it got to this meeting of the 4th of May,
yes.
it wasn't about returning to his job.
Well, his evidence was that of the two meetings that he held with the ESCOM delegation, it was in the first of the two meetings
Okay.
where he raised this issue of him going back to work, and he said he was told in very clear terms that that was off the table, out of the question. You say you don't remember hearing anybody saying that to him.
No, not from what I've written down.
Yes.
That's, I think this may be the second meeting,
Yeah,
because here already
yeah,
the proposal is already in the formulation
Yeah.
stage.
okay. Mr. Slade.
Thank you, Chair. And then you attended Mr. Machela Koko's meeting as well. And you seek to convey that that meeting was different from the others in comparison.
Mr. Chair, the meeting was markedly different to the others.
Well, before you get to that one, let's talk about the one where Ms. Molefe was the meeting between the ESCOM delegation and Ms. Molefe. Did she talk about going back to work at all at her meeting with the ESCOM delegation?
I think the first issue for her was that there had been no communication whatsoever.
Sorry?
I think the first issue for Ms. Molefe was that there had been no communication whatsoever. So she didn't have an understanding of where the inquiry was, what her position was. You know, the impression I got is that she did want to come back.
The impression you got was that she did want to go back.
Yes.
But was that based on what she said? Or was that just your impression?
Just my impression at the time. Because this was actually, for her, the 4th of May was the first meeting that she'd actually spoken to the board.
Yes. Do you know what the attitude of the ESCOM delegation was to the possibility of her going back to work?
Well, it was at that meeting that they'd already spoken about how do we find a solution for you to
Yes.
leave. So that's how the meeting started.
Yes. Did the solution necessarily exclude her going back to work?
Yes,
Why do you say that?
because it said what was asked to her was, can we find a way of amicably parting ways?
Yes, okay. And that came from the ESCOM delegation,
That came from the ESCOM delegation.
not from her.
Not from her.
Yes. And what was her response to this?
She said, because it ended with, would you be open to this discussion? And also the public management thereof. That was the delegation quote. And she responded by saying, ESCOM had already appointed lawyers in the matter, so it put her at an unfair advantage. I mean, it put them at an unfair advantage. And the trust issues are so deep, so it would be something I would consider.
Okay, all right. Then you can move to Mr. Koko's meeting with the delegation.
Thank you,
Mr.
Chair.
Selega.
Thank you. Yes, and you were,
I just wanted to make sure that before she says Mr. Koko's meeting with the delegation was different, we have a clear picture as to how the other two meetings were like.
indeed,
Okay.
indeed, Chair. And Ms. Daniels, then you may go into Mr. Koko's meeting.
Yes. Oh,
This meeting, does it take place on the same day as well?
this one was on the 11th of May, 2015.
So you deal with it on paragraph 68 of your affidavit. And could you briefly just explain to the chairperson how this meeting compares to the others, to the other two you've mentioned?
Mr. Chairman, this meeting was markedly different in that it was hosted by Mrs. Klein and Mr. Koza, and there was quite a collegiate familiar, sort of bantering beforehand, and it was opened by Mrs. Klein with sort of, even though the correct words were like without prejudice and off the record, it opened with how do we treat people and things like that. So there was a tone being set, which was different.
It was a what meeting?
It was more collegial
Yeah,
than the others.
okay.
The others were more adversarial
Yes.
in terms of they came in, they sat down, and the next question is, how are we going to part ways?
Mm.
This one, there was banter, there was, it was just, the atmosphere was different. He was also given time to explain. And he went into, great lengths of saying, thank you for the opportunity for being heard, even though he reserves his rights and things like that. And he once again went on about, I really don't understand why I've been suspended, but he wouldn't make it difficult for the board if the board thought that he shouldn't come back. So it was very much, and I think he was shocked, and he couldn't understand why he was where he was at that point.
Did you say you think he was shocked?
These are the words that he used.
Or that he used?
That he used in this presentation, because he was allowed to actually present to the board.
You believe he was shocked?
No, I thought he was acting.
Okay.
He was
Yes,
he was a very good actor. And it was about, he couldn't understand where he was, and it's at this meeting that he coined that phrase that Eskom is in my veins, the blood in my veins is blue, those kinds of things. So he really went to town, and they actually indulged him in terms of explaining. Of course, he did come with the narrative of the reason for his suspension was because of Mr. Tsotsi. His animosity with Mr. Tsotsi. So that came, that was in the narrative. I think then what was important, he also pointed out his career in Eskom and things like that. So there was a lot of that. Mrs. Klein then also thanked him for being very honest with the board, and so did Mr. Koza. They both said, thank you for the explanation. Thank you for sharing this knowledge with us. This was a totally different tone to the other meetings. None of the other executives meetings where I had been present had ever had this kind of dialogue or exchange. And then the question came from Mrs. Klein as, could you fully trust this board again? And he responded that he would be able to, that he was confident that the issues with the previous board were resolved and that he would be able to work with this board.
Are you done?
I think that
To paragraph 71.
covers what
Ms. Klein, in her affidavit to the commission, Ms. Klein says, Mr. Kuku was the one executive who wanted his job back.
That's incorrect, in my view, Mr. Chairman. because they were not given the opportunity to even, articulate it properly that they wanted their job back. They were just, the first line in the meeting was, how do we part ways? So even if they were considering coming back, there was just no opportunity for them to do so. Mr. Coco was asked, would you trust this board and would you be able to work with this board again?
You may or may not know this, but Ms. Klein in particular has also stated in her affidavit that she understood that at least the two executives, that's Ms. Tsolofelo Molefe and Mr. Marokane, wanted settlement agreements with the board. That's why the board appointed a delegation to go create settlement agreements with them. If you don't know, you don't know. If you know, you may tell the chairperson what you know.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know the minutiae, but from where I was sitting, that was not the approach of the board. This delegation was appointed to exit the executive. And more particularly, Mr. Matona, Mr. Marokane, and Ms. Molefe.
Yeah, I'm reminded because I'm giving you Ms. Klein's version to the commission. I'm reminded of one version she also gave, which is that it appears that you were in fact involved in the drafting of the letters for the suspension of the executives, you together with Mr. Salim Essa.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, I addressed that in my supplementary affidavit. Those letters which he attaches were drafted purportedly on the 10th of March. I did have a template of the letterhead, so I could accept that I would be the author and listed as the author. But if you look at the data presented on there are a couple of red flags on that metadata that she presents. Firstly, the letters are printed before they are created. They are also talking of hearings of suspension which did not take place on their own evidence. And it would be impossible for me to have worked with someone that I had just met. So you will see in my affidavit, I said, I question the authenticity of those letters.
Yes. In fact, the letters are termed pre-suspension letters. But now, in your explanation to the chairperson, I want to go back to these exit negotiations, you call them. If you say the board, what the board sought to achieve was to exit the executives, the three you have mentioned, did you know what the reason for that was? Because here they would get rid of or exit the CEO and the CFO all at the same time.
Mr. Chairman, my only supposition as to why these people needed to be exited from their position was to make way for Brian Molefe coming to Eskom and the eventual transferring of Anuj Singh as well. Because those were the positions that were open. Mr. Koko came back to Generation. I think he was moved from procurement and engineering.
He was moved from where?
From Group Technology and Commercial. He went to Generation when he came back in Brian Molefe's time.
So Generation is it's a division within Eskom.
Yes, that's correct.
Can you explain to the chairperson what Generation was responsible for?
Generation was responsible for the managing and operation of the power stations.
Now, your explanation to the chairperson that you think the executives were being removed in order to make way for Mr. Brian Molefe and Mr. Anuj Singh, is that just an impression on your part, or do you have some factors that you are able to point to for the benefit of the chairperson, which you would say you relied on for making that conclusion?
One of the factors is that while these discussions were continuing, the board, Molefe had already, Mr. Molefe, Brian Molefe had already arrived at Eskom. And in fact, I think it was the 4th of May, he had, in between these exit negotiations, the board delegation had a meeting with Mr. Molefe. I do.
Is that on page 17? 17? Page 17?
Oh,
Paragraph 73.
no, that was a different meeting.
Okay.
It would be paragraph 62, Mr. Chairman, of my affidavit. Because as I say, in between the meetings, a meeting with Brian Molefe also took place.
This is on the, which date is this?
On page 40.
Yeah, but the date?
This was on the 4th of May, the very same day that the delegation met with Ms. Molefe and Mr. Matona.
Well, already in April, the minister had announced the secondment of Mr. Molefe.
Yes.
17 April. 17 April 2015.
Yes, she literally parachuted into the office that day. I recall I was standing at the CEO's secretary's desk delivering some documents, and the next minute, Minister Brown comes literally flying in with Brian Molefe in tow. The chairpersons of Eskom and Transnet, I think, arrived a little bit later. You know, there was a time difference. But he literally was parachuted into Eskom.
He or she was literally what?
Parachuted into Eskom.
Who is that now?
Mr. Molefe,
Oh,
Brian
Mr. Molefe.
Brian Molefe.
Yes, okay.
He arrived with Minister Brown
Oh,
on the day that
on the day that he
Mr.
arrived.
Seleka talks about.
Yes. 1 second,
Is
Mr.
it the day that he
Seleka.
arrived?
So,
Sorry, Mr. Slager, we are at 4:30. I need us to take a break, but let's talk about how much more time you envisage you might need with Ms. Daniels.
30 minutes, Chair. I personally need 30 minutes.
30 minutes?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, no, that's right. Ms. Daniels, that's still fine with you? We can continue?
It's fine.
Okay, counsel for all concerned, is that fine? Okay. Okay, thank you. Let's take a short break. It's 4:30 now. Let's resume at 5:45, and then we'll go on, and then we'll finish.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we adjourn.
question and you don't know the answer, please do not speculate unless if we ask you to surmise from what was happening. Were you aware of how he was seconded?
I'm not aware of how he was seconded, Mr. Chairman, but I did have to administer the process of regularizing if that's what Mr. Selek is asking.
Oh yes, you had to administer
Administer the process, put the paperwork in place
of what?
of the secondment.
Yes. Okay.
And probably what you should tell me is what it is that you implemented in order to give effect to the, in order to bring about the secondment.
Okay.
Yes, you can certainly do so. Chairperson, as she answers your question, Ms. Daniels has indicated to us he would actually prefer to have an affidavit specifically submitted to us dealing with
Yes.
the secondment.
I'm quite happy that she deals with that after she has submitted the affidavit. If you are happy, I was
Yes.
just trying to simplify your question to her.
It was.
So I think it's up to you whether you want her to deal with it briefly or you want to defer it to the next time she comes back.
Yeah. Ms. Daniels, you're going to go into the details which I wouldn't know offhand. I'll prefer that we defer it.
I would also prefer, because it actually is quite detailed, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
And I would like to put a full picture before you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Then, in regard to, were you aware that the executives were suspended on the ground or preferred reason that there was going to be an investigation?
Yes, that was explained to us, Mr. Chairman, as employees, by Ms. Klein and Mr. Tsotsi.
Yes. And we understand that Denton's was subsequently appointed to conduct an investigation.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. Did you have to deal with Denton's?
I did not deal with the appointment of Denton's. I was interviewed by one of the Denton's team members.
You were interviewed.
Yes, I was.
Do you know why were you interviewed? Why you were interviewed?
Because one of the areas was primary energy and procurement, I got interviewed on those issues.
And who was the, what did you call them? The group executive for that division?
At the time of the review, it was Machela Koko, acting group chief executive. Group executive, my apologies, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, well, let me put this to you. Ms. Klein talks about this Denton's report, that there were 3 versions. And the first version was destroyed, according to her, because it disclosed the names of persons and entities who had not been consulted. She goes on to talk about the second version, from which the names were redacted. And then talks about another version which was redacted by yourself and subsequently made public without the board approval. Could you respond to that? Well, firstly, are you aware of those allegations she's making?
I did watch the testimony of Mrs. Klein, Mr. Chairman. So I am well aware of what she testified. I'm also aware of what she put in affidavit, because the commission provided it to me to respond, and I do have a response to that. Mr. Seleka's question is just a bit complex, as most matters at Eskom. So I'm not sure where to start, Mr. Seleka. I would just need guidance from you.
Simplify it for her.
Let me simplify. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Seleka.
Let's start with what is the version of the report said to have been destroyed.
Mr. Chairman, I want to unequivocally tell you that the versions of the Denton's report that you have and that the Commission has is not complete. There has been an original version that was destroyed. And the reason I say that is because I had sight of that version by virtue of the fact that I was in the office of Dr. Ngobani. That version, which for the purposes of, just as I say, was complicated, I'm going to call the original version, because that's how it's referred to in the minutes. But that original version is non-existent in today's time. And I say so because I had to read it at the time. It was a presentation. It was not in a formal report yet. It was a presentation to the board of Eskom. And it detailed the tender manipulation, the criminality that was associated with one Machela Coco. And it went into detail into the interviews that were conducted. So it was quite a damning report that any board should not have discarded at that stage. The report spoke about the other divisions. It did speak about, how we could improve processes around primary energy, diesel purchases, the financing. It actually did not find any fault, for want of a better word, with the way that the finances were reported. Because there were external influences. Group capital, it spoke about how we could do things better in terms of project management, which were things that were already being addressed in Eskom. The primary areas that were really, really unpacked were the procurement areas, of which Machela Coco's name featured prominently as to how the manipulation took place. That version was then collected and destroyed. I found an electronic version, I thought it was, on my computer, which I did hand to the Commission, but I don't think we could have broken the code to that. But so that's why I'm saying my testimony and why I'm passionate about saying that original document and that the board deliberately and destroyed.
So, but you say the report that was destroyed, you have been able to find a version of it in your computer.
I thought it was a version. I'm not sure because it's
Also, you have not been able to access it?
No.
Okay, but If,
But it
if
has
it is
been-
accessed, you would know if you, once you read it, you would know if it is the same.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chairman, and I have handed that to the Commission.
Yes, okay, all right. Now, do you know whether that report had been submitted to the board by Denton's as Denton's report or final report, or whether it had been submitted as one of the drafts before the final report?
It is not clear from the records of ESCOM that we went through,
Yes.
but from my recollection, it wasn't in report format. It was in presentation format, and it said these are the findings that are coming out.
So what is your understanding that this was a presentation that Denton's was putting or was going to put before the board in order to forewarn them of what to expect in the final report?
Yes, that would be a good way to describe it.
Yes. But do you know whether Denton's ever got a chance to present that document to the board in a meeting, or whether Denton's simply submitted that document to the board for the board members to read so that they are forewarned of what the final report was to look like?
Mr. Chairman, it's not clear from the records of ESCOM whether that was in a meeting, because the copy that I was was handed to me by Dr. Ngubani. So I'm not sure, but in the minutes you will see, and I refer to them, and I say that in paragraph 88 of my affidavit,
Yes.
that these details did not make it into the official records of ESCOM, as it was decided by the board that it would be destroyed. This is recorded in the board minute of 14 August, where it clearly states, concern was expressed with regard to the collection and destruction of initial reports. The company secretary was expected to take the necessary steps to ensure that all original reports were collected in exchange for the final reports. In view of this concern, the chairman of P&G's People and Governance, Ms. Vanita Klein, undertook to ensure that all reports were returned to her within 7 days for them to be destroyed.
Yes.
And that is why I say that original report, I'm not sure, they talk about initial reports and they talk about original versions, but for me, that version has not made it into the official records of ESCOM.
Having read both, I take it you have read the final report
Yes.
of Denton's. Is it your observation that there is a vast difference between the final report and the document that you say was destroyed, which you think sought to forewarn the board of what was to come in the final report?
Yes, that is my contention, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Unequivocally so, that
Yeah.
because you will see that the reports that I've provided to the Commission, the preliminary report and the final report are very similar, because the board actually instructed Denton's to stop the investigation. So those two reports, even though they are two reports, they are very similar. There's not much difference. I think the dates are even the same because they say instructed to stop as at this date.
And you say that the differences between the final report and that document that you say was destroyed relates to the alleged role that was said to have been played by Mr. Koko in procurement matters.
Yes,
That's where the big difference lies.
big difference lies in the
Yes.
influence on particular contracts,
Yes.
particular specifications, manipulation over a period of time.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Selega.
Thank you, Chairperson. Ms. Daniels, you may want to refer the Chairperson to the minutes. The minute of the meeting you're referring to, I think is paragraph 89, where you say a copy of the minutes is attached marked SMD 7. You find that on page 47.
I'm sorry, before that, this document you are talking about that was ultimately destroyed, would it have been emailed to the different members of the board, or would hard copies have been made and they were distributed physically at a meeting of the board, and after the meeting they were collected to be destroyed?
This was hard copies, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
These were not emailed.
Yeah.
These were hard copies.
Okay. All right. Yes, Mr. Stiller.
Thank you, Chair. And I think the Chairperson's question might be answered by what is reflected on the minutes. I said the minutes are on page 47. Minutes of ESCOM holding board meeting, extract from the final minutes of ESCOM board in-committee meeting on 14 August 2015 at the ESCOM Research, Testing and Development Boardroom. You see that at 900.
Yes. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the resolution that I quoted. It's actually on page 49. It's item 6.2.1, and it says the company secretary should ensure, the company secretary should ensure that all initial reports are collected and destroyed in exchange for the receipt of the final Denton report. 6.2.2, it is noted that the chairman of People and Governance, as in 6.2.1 above, ensures all reports are returned to her within 7 days and destroyed.
I see also on page 48, paragraph 1 to 3. Members considered. Media expectation. You see that?
Yes.
Could you read that also quickly?
Members considered the media expectation with regard to the outcome of the Denton's investigation and supported that the report be released to the Minister with a covering letter from the Chairman of the Board articulating the next steps. Copies of the final report would be delivered to the members, the Group Chief Executive, the Chief Financial Officer, and external auditors. However, concern was expressed with regard to the collection and destruction of initial reports. The Company Secretary was expected to take the necessary steps to ensure that all original reports were collected in exchange for the final reports. In view of this concern, the Chairman of P&G, Ms. Vanita Klein, undertook to ensure that all reports were returned to her within 7 days for them to be destroyed.
Then followed the resolution
Yes.
You started with in paragraph 6.2.1 and 6.2.2.
Yes, that is correct.
I see that those minutes are not signed, but we have seen minutes last week and maybe this week that were signed like more than a year later and so on. Do you know whether there is any particular reason why these ones are not signed?
Mr. Chairman, these were extracts of minutes. You will see it's noted extract. I'm not sure why it's signed, but this one comes from my personal file.
Okay.
Because I kept the minutes, or I kept some of my records. So the original should be signed.
Oh, so there should be signed
There
ones.
should be a signed version.
Okay, so the legal team, we must check that.
Yes, Chair. Ms. Daniels, then the issue regarding you making public a further redacted version of the report without board approval, which is what Ms. Venita Klein alleges happened.
Mr. Chairman, the redacted version happened in 2017, February 2017. At the time, I did talk about it in my supplementary affidavit. At the time, late January, we were hit with a number of PIA applications and also a set of media questions by the former investigative journalist Sikanati Manchancha, who is now the spokesperson of Eskom. He sent a rather detailed, I think it was about 3 pages of questions. And we had I think there were 3 or 4 PIA applications at the same time. The board had decided to release the final Denton report. But at the same time, it asked me to get legal opinion on how do we do that in terms of the PIA provisions, etc. And were we allowed to release those documents as is, without, because we hadn't notified the affected parties. Even though the report was not incriminating, there were names of companies and earnings and things like that in there. And the initial reports showed that while we could release Eskom employees and Eskom officials, we would need to notify the companies involved, etc. And the preliminary legal opinion was shared with the board. The recommendation was that we redact those names from the report that was to be released to the public. And it is that that redacted report that was then released in 2017. There was no malice intended. It was purely based on legal advice. I do have the files. Will make it available to the Commission, the legal opinion stating why we did that. I would not have been, I actually also sent it to the Minister on the 5th of February because the media conference was set for the 7th of February. So I sent her a copy of the speech, a copy of, the documentation, and the rationale as to why we would be redacting the document on the 5th of February. And I said this was a preliminary legal opinion. I would not have been able to send that to the minister had the board not been aware of that. So that is why I contest Ms. Klein's version and saying that, she makes it appear as if I redacted it out of my own volition and just made it appear on that day. In fact, on the day of that press briefing, Dr. Ngubane asked me to explain to the media why we had redacted the documents. So I do have those documents available. It was not done out of seeking to hide information. It was done on the advice of counsel.
And you are saying to the chairperson that the board was aware of that?
Yes, the board was much aware of that because I would not have been able to converse with the minister in the manner that I did had the board not been availed of that information.
Two last points. And sorry, they go back to the testimony you've already given. The last meeting you had at Melrose Arch, where you place, is it the minister or deputy minister, Ben Martins?
Deputy Minister of Public Enterprises,
yes,
Mr. Chair.
In the picture, this work stream hasn't investigated that, but I should draw to your attention, and I'm sure you know by now, that Mr. Ben Martins has denied being present in that meeting.
Yes, he denied it immediately the next morning. I woke up to a press conference being held by Minister Martins. I'm fully aware that he has denied it.
Okay. Chair, I don't know whether she needs to comment on that, but it's a matter we haven't investigated. Number two, Ms. Daniels, it's the paragraph in your affidavit on page 17, paragraph 73, where you're talking about the board delegation meeting on 19 May 2015, and that you were in attendance. Now, I think you need to address that to the chairperson, because the members of the board delegation, those who were appointed to be the board delegation, will have to be confronted with what you say there.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, on the 19th of May, this was after these discussions with the suspended executives, the Mrs. Klein and I'm just trying to find my notes here. Mrs. Klein opened this discussion by saying that they needed to find settlement with the parties because they needed to clear the decks. And I put that in quotation marks because that is how I made my notes, and that's how she said it. She also confirmed that the shareholder has approved to get rid of the people and make the necessary concessions if it sorts out the problem. And she stressed that the priority is to get the people off and away. The meeting then discussed the various settlement arrangements that had been put in place, and it said that the minister had a ceiling of 12 million to negotiate, and that the guiding principles were as follows, as I put here, that they would be able to do full cost to company for up to 12 months. They would be able to pay tranche 8 and tranche 9, That was in relation to the incentive, the long-term incentive scheme that executives were on. There could be a contribution to the legal costs and a communication plan around the suspended executives could be negotiated.
Okay. Would you please tell the chairperson where did this meeting take place?
My notes don't reflect where this took place.
Could this meeting have taken place in Eskom, at Protea Hotel, at Melrose Arch, or wherever?
This would have either been at the Protea Hotel or at Eskom.
And who was in attendance, apart from yourself?
This was Mrs. Klein, Mr. Kumalo, Dr. Ngubani, and Mr. Koza.
And?
Mr. Koza.
Thank you, Chair. That concludes my questions for Ms. Daniels-Smith.
Thank you. Where is Annexure SMD6 to which you refer in paragraph 74 of your affidavit?
If I may assist,
Yes,
Chair,
please,
page
yeah.
38.
38.
Yes.
Oh, somehow I saw the colors at page 38 and somehow I associated those colors with the colors on the cover of the transcript of the parliamentary
Portfolio
committee. So, okay, I just want.
Chair, may I ask, while the chairperson is going through this document,
Sorry?
may I ask some questions while
Yes,
the
yes,
chairperson is
yes.
going through?
Yeah.
Ms. Daniels, this document is dated 4 June 2015. And in your affidavit, you refer to it as, what do you refer to it as? Is it a briefing to the minister?
Yes.
Yes, a brief to the minister from chairman on the status of the suspended executives. Now, the status of the suspended executives, I wonder what do they mean by that? What do they mean by that? I see paragraph 1 of the document on page 40, its introduction. Paragraph 2 is board resolutions of 11 March 2015. So those are the resolutions we have learned about all of last week. Paragraph 3 deals with the terms and conditions of suspension. That too we learned about. But you want to convey to the minister the status as it on the 4th of June, or maybe around that time. Paragraph 4 deals with a fact-finding forensic inquiry. So it doesn't specifically relate to the executives. So 3 says the PNG identified the key executives to be put on suspension for the duration of the inquiry as Tidiso Matuna, Chief Executive Officer, Tselofelo Molefe, Financial Director, Den Marokane Group Executive, Group Capital, Machela Koko, Group Executive Technology and Commercial. Well, by 4 June, the minister would have known that. So what is new here, which you are seeking to convey to the minister? You go to page 45.
Yes.
Paragraph 5 deals with court challenge by Mr. Matuna.
Well, maybe I can ask this question. You see at paragraph 8 at page 45, under interactions with other executives, you write, aside from Mr. Matona, the executives have in various ways approached the company and have indicated that they are amenable to a settlement being made in terms of which they would resign from their positions and accept an exit package. Can you see that?
Yes, I see that.
Now, that suggests to me that you are saying that Mr. Mantona had not approached the company and indicated that he was amenable to a settlement being made in terms of which he would resign from his position and accept an exit package. Do you accept that?
I accept that because
Yes.
he took ESCOM to court.
Sorry?
He took ESCOM to court.
He took ESCOM to court.
Yes.
Yes, but were you not recording here what the position was as at the meeting that you talk about in your affidavit, I think on the 19th, is it 19th of May? Yeah, you know, paragraph 73. Paragraph 73 of your affidavit, which is at page 17, page 17, paragraph 73 of your affidavit. You talk about what happened at a meeting of the delegation of the board of 19 May. And then after you have said what was said at that meeting, you then say in paragraph 74, I was then asked to prepare a brief to the minister from the chairman on the status of the suspended executives. A copy of the briefing document is annexed here to marked annexure SMT 6. So, and then your briefing seems to be dated 4 June 2015, is that right?
Yes, that's the date on here, Mr. Chairman.
So the status of the discussions with regard to the suspended executives, what you recorded at paragraph 8, is it what was the position as at the 19th of May when the delegation of ESCOM had a meeting? Is it what was the position at the time you prepared the document, which was 4 June 2015? Or what was it?
Mr. Chairman, the notes from the 19th of May were not, did not inform the brief. The notes from the 19th of May that I have did not inform the brief because in my preparations with the commission is when I discovered my notes.
No, I'm talking about this document.
Okay. I would have to.
I'm SMT 6. I'm asking whether you sought to record in that document the status of the matter of the executives as to where the process was, or as at the 19th of May, or as at the 5th or 4th of June, or on some other date?
As of the 19th of May.
As of?
The 19th of May. 'Cause
19th of
my
May.
note says TM,
Yes. Okay,
and then there's a question mark,
yeah,
and to be confirmed.
okay. So you certainly, did that precede the meetings? The meeting between the ESCOM delegation and Mr. Matona to try and discuss a resolution of the suspension. Did the meeting of the delegation of the 19th of May precede the meeting of the delegation of ESCOM with Mr. Matona to try and settle
The final meeting, yes.
the final meeting?
Yes.
Had the first meeting taken place?
Yes, the meetings had
It
taken
had taken
place
place. So
already.
if your minutes, if this document, particularly paragraph 8, is correct, then it would seem that what you say there, as far as Mr. Matona is concerned, is not in line with what Ms. Klein said, and I think Dr. Ngubane as well, but I might be mistaken about Dr. Ngubane, namely that all the, except for Mr. Koko, all the executives wanted to leave ESCOM. And they denied, Ms. Klein denied any suggestion from Mr. Matona that he said he wanted to go back to work. So this, it would seem that what you say in paragraph 8 would be in support of Mr. Matona's version.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. But with regard to the other executives, if what you say is to be read as suggesting that they made the approach to ESCOM that they wanted to go, if that is what paragraph 8 also means in regard to the other executives, then that would be in line with what Ms. Klein, I think, said. But if you don't mean that, but you mean that ESCOM approached them and said, let's talk about exit packages, and in response, they then said, well, we are amenable, that might then be slightly different. Are you able to say which one you are talking about, which one of these two scenarios you are talking about?
Mr. Chairman, my scenario is that it was put to them,
Yeah,
we want to part ways.
yeah, okay,
Okay? How amenable are you to that?
yeah,
Okay. Even though I drafted this would have been signed off by the chairperson. So the language would be different.
yeah,
But what I'm saying to you today, and that's why I gave you what was given to the minister, what I'm saying to you today is that the executives were not, except for Machela Koko, the executives were not given a choice. They may have expressed that they wanted to come back, but that was not, to use Mr. Matona's words, that was not on the table. So, you know,
Okay.
that's what I mean.
okay,
I am just giving you so that you can see the full picture
Yeah.
of what occurred.
yes, okay, no, that's fine. So what is your final reaction to Ms. Klein's evidence and Dr. Ngubane's evidence before me, that the board wanted these, all these executives to come back. They wanted them to come back. It's the executives who chose that they didn't want to come back. What is your reaction to that evidence?
Mr. Chairman, with the greatest of respect, Dr. Ngubane and Ms. Klein are lying to this commission. They distorted the truth. Ms. Klein was at the forefront of wanting to get rid of the executives, in her own words. Dr. Ngubane played the statesperson behind the scenes. From what I witnessed, there was no intention, other than for Machela Koko, there was no intention to bring back any of those executives.
Okay, all right. Then the last one goes back to that offer of 800 million rand. What was your understanding of what Mr. Issa wanted you to do in return for him giving you that 800 million rand if you accepted it?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding was Mr. Koko was on suspension at the time, and he would have faced disciplinary action. And had the disciplinary action run properly, he would have been fired. And I think that what Mr. Issa wanted was a manipulation of that process. You will see in Machela Koko's parliamentary testimony, he only refers to the report that exonerates him. He does not go further than that. We all know, I spent a lot of time, there was senior counsel appointed to actually run that disciplinary. The board overturned my selection of senior counsel. The charge sheet was tampered with so that there were gaps. And that is why the disciplinary ended up, being such a sham.
Now, so I thought that you had said the 800 million rand was offered so as to get Mr. Koko back to the company,
Yes.
because he was on suspension at the time.
Yes.
Is that right?
That is correct. He was on suspension because of that Impulse International.
Or it was not the suspension that we are talking, it was a separate suspension.
No.
Oh,
No,
and this was when?
2017.
Oh, this was a separate.
A separate one. He was acting group chief executive already.
Yes.
And
Okay.
this is why
Yes.
you will recall that
What would have been what would be your normal role when an executive such as Mr. Koko was to face disciplinary process at the time? What powers did you have?
I would have assisted with the choice of chairperson and evidence leader, and I would have assisted, getting the evidence together from the ESCOM side, and I would have worked with. Then, once that had been prepared, it would have been handed over to the industrial relations team. And that is what I did in the beginning, to make sure that the evidence bundle, the charge sheets and everything were correct and were handed over for the IR team to run.
Mr. Selega, is this one of the parts that may need to have 3 notices sent out before she comes back next time?
Certainly, Chairperson.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Because we don't have it in her affidavit.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So you'll tell me more about it when you come back, when
Yes.
all the details have been put on affidavit and
Yes.
those who may be implicated have been served by way of 3 notices. Okay. I don't know whether counsel or Ms. Daniels had any plans to re-examine.
So before he does that, let me just...
Or you have some questions?
Yeah, just one last point, Ms. Daniels. Going back to that paragraph in that report which the chairperson referred you to under paragraph 8, which says, aside from Mr. Matuna, the executives have in various forms approached the company and have indicated that they are amenable to a settlement being made in terms of which they would resign from their positions and accept an exit package. If you look at Ms. Venita Klein's testimony, or even the affidavit, including your testimony today, because you attended the meeting where Mr. Koko's exit settlement negotiations took place, that paragraph would not be correct in relation to him.
No, it's not correct. But they did offer, I think if I recall, they did offer him, you know, a letter.
Sorry, they what?
They did give him a letter.
What do you mean?
A letter to say what?
What would you call it? Just an indication of what a settlement package would look like.
Mr. Koko,
Yes,
if you wanted to go.
if you wanted to go, yes.
Oh, okay.
No, I thought this paragraph says, apart from Matuna, aside from Matuna, the others wanted to go. But that can't be correct if one looks at the evidence of both yourself and Ms. Lane that he wanted to come back.
So Mr. Koko wanted
Yes,
to come
that
back.
he
Yes,
wanted to
that's
come.
correct.
So what is being conveyed to the minister here is not correctly reflecting
It's not correctly
the
reflected.
position.
That's correct.
Well,
Well, is it correct in regard to the other 2 executives? did I take it out of
was
your
my
mouth?
next question.
I'm sorry. I just couldn't resist. Is it correct in regard to them?
Mr. Chairman, at the time, there was a settlement negotiation ongoing with Mr. Madukani. And there was,
That doesn't mean it is correct. That there were settlement negotiations with him doesn't mean the statement is correct necessarily.
yes, that's what I was.
Because the question is about who made the approach.
That's what I'm saying, that was not correct. The approach was made by the board.
So this statement, except for Mr. Matona, is not correct in regard to any of the other executives.
That's correct.
Yes.
But
is that something you realize only now?
Yes.
Yes.
Chair,
Yes.
that's it.
Counsel, from Ms. Daniels, did you plan to do any re-examination now, or you might do it when she returns?
Chair, I think I need to consult on certain aspects of her evidence today
Yes. So,
prior to presenting any re-examination.
yeah. So you could do it next time she comes back?
Indeed, sir.
Okay, all right. Thank you. All right, I'm going to release you, but you will come back to deal with the other matters that have not been covered. But thank you for coming. Thank you to everybody for cooperation. for the rest of the week, the commission is not going to have any sittings. This is just for to inform the public. It will resume on Monday next week, and next week it will hear evidence relating to what is called the 1 billion rand housing project of the Free State government. That will be for next week. We adjourn.
Thank you, Chair.